Hello and welcome to the Rock here in Pinetown. We're all going through this pandemic together. It's a worldwide thing. It's what's called a global storm. But there's been storms before, but none quite like this one. We remember back in the First World War. In fact, it was called a World War, but it didn't really affect the whole world. It affected the Germans, affected Europe, affected Britain, and eventually affected America. But there were a lot of places it didn't affect. Then we had World War II. And World War II, it also affected a lot of places, but again, it wasn't all over the world. And if it wasn't at all at the same time. But here we've got a pandemic that's affecting the whole world at the same time. Everybody seems to be in the same storm. We've all got our problems, we've all got our storms, and in our storms, we've got individual storms. So we've got this world storm, we've got this pandemic, but we've got our personal storms, each and every one of us. My grandfather, he fought in the First World War, and in the First World War, his storm was there. That's where he died. My father, he was amazingly, he was in the Second World War, and it was more well, let me put it this way. The Second World War started in 1939, and my dad was in the Royal Air Force. Now, because we lived in Northern Ireland, there was no conscription, so therefore he didn't have to join up to go and fight. But as it happened that there was no work in Ireland, there was no jobs available, so in 1938 he applied to join the Royal Air Force. He joined the Royal Air Force, and within a few months Hitler had declared war on Britain. So he was there uh, more by unfortunate situations than by choice. But he was there and he survived it. But he's also had his personals. My parents, and I'm talking from experience, they had their own storms. My sister was born back in my eldest sister, who's passed now, was born in 1932. And I had another sister born a few years later, and she died of pneumonia. What a tragedy for it to happen to my mom and dad, that to have a young child of about 3 or 4 years old to die of a disease like that, pneumonia, at that age. It was shocking. Then my sister, who was older, who was born before her, who I mentioned, when my dad was coming home from the Air Force on leave, when he was in the UK, he came back and she came running down the steps to greet him, and she had a horrific fall, so much so that she smashed her face, her head in on the stone concrete steps when she tumbled down. My dad picked her up and he remolded her nose there on the spot, took her to the hospital. She survived, but she had brain damage for the rest of her life. My mom and dad, they pursued on and they carried on. Life just carried on. And they worked hard, they got through. And there was a lot of storms in their lives. My mom eventually had the storm of cancer. And eventually that took her life. But those are storms, and we've all got our own stories. We've all got our own storms. But we've also got great things. We've got seasons, we've got memories, we've got a lot of good stuff that we can remember. I remember when we were going on holiday, we were going away from Northern Ireland, we were going across to England. It was like, when you lived in Northern Ireland, going to England was like going overseas. Really, it was a big event, and there was a ship that took you across there from Belfast, however, to a place called Heysham, which is in Lancashire in the north of England, which is near Morecambe, which is close to Blackpool, and Blackpool was our destination. And we were on this ship, and it was in the harbour. In fact, it was more than in the harbour. It was up the river mouth, and it was anchored. It was firm. It was fixed. It was right alongside. There was no problem with it. And my dad and I, we decided, well, we would go to the gents. And as we were at the gents, all of a sudden, you had the clanking and clanking of the cisterns in the ship. And that was all. That was all it was. But as a young man at 9 years old, I looked at it, what on earth is this? My dad turned to me and he said, the ship is sinking. Panic. I got out of there before he did. And I can tell you something, he laughed. He laughed all the way, because he was joking. He was a man of humor. He'd gone through all these problems. He'd gone through all these issues in life, but he was still able to make a joke and to laugh. I must admit, I wasn't laughing at the time. I want to read you a story about a storm that Jesus was in, and it comes in Mark chapter 4, verse 35. And the Bible says, that day, then evening came, Jesus, he said to his disciples, let us go over to the other side. Goes on to say, leaving the crowd behind, they took along just as he was the boat. There were also other boats with him. A ferocious storm came up, and the waves broke over the boat. And the story goes on that Jesus, the disciples were so scared, and they didn't know what was going on, and they were probably bailing a lot of water out, and they went down to look for Jesus, and they found him that he was asleep, and they wakened him up, and they said, Master, Lord, don't you care about us? What a question to ask Jesus. Don't you care about us? Now, you see, that storm affected, the Bible says there that there was more than one boat. There was a lot of boats. That storm affects a lot of boats. So, although that we are all in one storm, all of us today, we are in this pandemic storm, but we're not all in the same boat. And we all have got our own little individual storms that we've got to sort out. We've got these worries. We've got this anxiety. We worry about our health, what's going to happen. We worry about our wealth, our finances. Where's that going to come from? But the Bible gives us storms from various Bible characters throughout. And from that, we can always equate. And we always have done, because let's be honest, when we were reading the Bible, when we got sermons, when we could equate, or we could understand what each character was going through, because we could relate to it ourselves. We get Job, we get Abraham, we get Joseph, who went away and was in the pit, and then he gets to the palace. We get Isaac, and we get Jacob and David, and Jonah, who was in the belly of a whale and who was actually vomited out, and it got to where he was going. Then we've got Peter, and we've got Paul. We've got all of these, right? These are the stories that would go. And when we go we sometimes we wonder why these things happen. But sometimes these things happen because these are the storms in life. And we can relate to all of these stories in the Bible, because we can understand, because we are going through all our own storms. In the Gospel of John, chapter 4, the Bible tells us that Jesus said he must go through Samaria. His disciples said, whoa, Samaria wasn't a place where the Jews wanted to go through. They were always being attacked there. There's a long history of that. He said, no, you must go through there. Now, all his peers and everybody else didn't. They never went through there. They avoided it. They went round to get to Jerusalem. They went round Samaria. But Jesus says, now I must go through. Why must he go through there? Because he had to meet a young woman at a well. A woman who was riddled with guilt, who had 5 husbands, and now she was living with someone that wasn't her husband. And he had to go there to set her free. Her guilt was holding her. Now, we all have our own seasons. Let's be honest. When you look back in your life, there are some times you can cherish and you think, oh, gee, this is great. I really enjoyed these times. These are good memories. These are things that are happy. But we look at our lives now, and we think, wow, now we've got to walk around, and we've got to wear a mask. It's compulsory. I was looking at the news last night, and they said that now they're thinking of bringing in wearing 2 masks. Well, I don't know about that, but I just carry on. But how did Jesus manage the storms? How did he do it? One of the things that he did was he allowed us to participate in the problems. Remember when he had 5,000, the Bible tells us there were 5,000 men. Okay, and then there was women and children, so he had about 10 to 20,000 people there. And all of a sudden, he's ministering to them, and they say, the disciples come and say, these people are hungry. We've got to send them away. And Jesus says, well, can't we feed them? Disciples, can't you help here? Can't you participate? Can't you do something? guys, can't we do something? First thing they relate to is money. You know what? Feeding this lot, it's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to cost like a year's wages for us to do that. See, Jesus responds to your faith. He responds to your faith. No matter how much faith you've got, say, oh, I have no faith. I'm in this place where a dark place, or I've got no faith, or you know what, I've been going to church for years, and now that the churches are closed, now that I hear what's going on social media, now that I look at the media on TV, now I'm so fearful my faith has gone. Jesus will meet you where your faith stops. And that's a promise. He doesn't measure it like that. He doesn't look at it. He responds to your faith. Jesus, people, Jairus, who was in charge of the synagogue, he was high up in the religious people there. He was well up. He was one of the top men in Judaism. And his daughter was dying, and in desperation, he turns to Jesus and he says, can you come with me to my home? My daughter is dying. And Jesus said, yes, I will. Let's go. And Jairus takes Jesus, and I'm sure he must have taken him by the arm, and he's walking him through. Now, it wasn't a case where he caught a taxi or an Uber or something like that. It was a case where they had to walk, and they had to plow, they had to go through. But Jesus, of course, at this time was quite famous, and the crowds were all gathering around, and they were pushing and shoving, and they were pushing up against him, and Jairus is clinging onto him. His daughter's dying. This is a father who's worried about his daughter, and he's pulling him through the crowds, and Jesus stops. Says, someone touched me. Wow. Someone touched me. There were thousands around him. Disciples said, yeah, Lord, there was plenty of people touching. They were all pushing up against you. He says, no, someone touched me specially. And then he looked around, and there was this woman who had an issue of blood. Now, here's the thing. Now, we've all heard this story many times. I just want to point a couple of things out. First of all, she was breaking the Jewish law. If you break the Jewish law, you're a sinner. This woman was a sinner. She broke the Jewish law. What did she do? She was bleeding in public. When you're bleeding as a woman, you've got to go into a place of isolation. You've got to go there. Now, this woman's been bleeding for 12 years, and she spent so much money on doctors and all sorts of stuff to try and get herself better. She couldn't. She was supposed to be isolated. She wasn't. According to Jewish law, she was breaking the law. She was actually there in public. Not only was she in public, she was touching people in public, because she didn't get to Jesus just because there was a path led there. She must have pushed her way through and elbowed her way through. She was touching it. That was against the law as well. And thirdly, she touched Jesus, and that was against the law because he was a male. There's no way a woman like that was allowed to touch a male. Jesus looked at her, and he could see the faith in her. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. He met her at that point in time. Just as she was going away, Jesus was walking away. Jairus is still hanging on to Jesus' arm. Someone comes up and says, don't take him anymore, because Jairus, your daughter, is dead. Jesus says to Jairus, come on, let's go. Let's carry on. Let's raise her up. Now, here's the thing. If he can heal a woman who is touching his shirt and grabbing onto it, if he can do that, surely he could have healed Jairus' daughter from where he was. But the Bible doesn't say that he did that. We hear of the centurion who comes along and says, can you heal my servant? Now, the centurion wasn't even a Jew. He said to Jesus, can you heal my... And Jesus said to him, yeah, he says, yes, I can. So the centurion says, well, come to my house. Jesus says, come to your house. And the centurion said, wow, no, don't come to my house. I don't want you to come to my house. All you have to do, Lord, is to say the word. If you say the word, he will be healed. We have Jairus who wanted to take Jesus all the way across town to his house. We have the woman who just grabbed hold of a shirt, and we have the centurion who said that his word is enough. And you know what? Jesus met each of the faith of those three individuals, and he can meet your faith exactly the same. Jesus never condemned any of them for their faith. He didn't say your faith is this high, or your faith is that high, or your faith is that high. Jesus met them, and he can meet every one of us. So Mark 4:35 says, let's cross over. Are you going to make it? You know, let's cross. That is the secret to the whole thing. Which is let us cross over. Which means Jesus is with you. Let us cross over. Wow, Lord, I can cross over to the other side if you come with me. Now, the other story of the storm is in Matthew chapter 14, verse 25 through 32. I'm not going to read it. You can read it yourselves. But this is when the storm is around and the wind is blowing high, and Peter looks out, and the whole disciples, they all look out, and they see what they think, perceive as a ghost, a talking ghost, or walking on the water, which freaked them out, which quite frankly would probably freak me out as well if I saw that. And then Peter shouted, Lord, if that is you, then ask me to come and I'll come and meet you. And Jesus said to him, come forth. Sometimes we have got to step out in faith. Sometimes the way to get to the other side, sometimes the way to cross over is by faith. Sometimes in our journey we need to make decisions. That's interesting, eh? You know, we often don't make decisions until we get, Lord, do this, and I'll know that this is the right way. Lord, when we do this, then do that, and I know the right way. And Lord, when you go to the third way, Lord, yes, now it's confirmation I'm on the right path. It's not faith. What you're doing is you're putting a fleece down to God. And then when the fourth time you say, right, Lord, now I've taken this step. I've gone 1, 2, 3, and now I'm on the fourth step, and poof, God doesn't show up. You think, what happened? What happened? Are you not there anymore? Maybe Jesus is saying, look, for this next step, you're going to have to stop trusting in your visible support. For this next step, you're going to have to step out of the boat. The boat is your visible support. Next time, you're going to have to step out onto the water where there's no visible support. Sometimes, because of our circumstances, we freak out like Peter did. He gets out and he starts walking in the water and he's doing all right. But the circumstances around him, which was the wind, made him lose faith. And sometimes when we step out, we lose the faith. But do you know one thing? He is with you. He will get you to the other side, but maybe not the way you think. Maybe not the way you've planned it. But he will get you there. Matthew 14, verse 32 says, Jesus grabbed him, Peter, and he took him by the hand and he walked him back to the boat. Interesting, he didn't walk him to the other side. To safety on the land. He walked him back to the boat. He walked him back to the place he stepped out of. He walked him back to the boat that was in the storm. He walked him back into his storm. But the Bible says that immediately that they got into the boat, the storm stopped. Why? Because Jesus is with you and he's got you by the hand. Remember in the earlier story we read, Jesus was sleeping. This is the thing. You've got to know that you're going to go through the storms of life. You've got to know that there are going to be challenges. Now, I'm not talking just about the folk who are watching and the folk who are listening. And believe me, this goes out to a lot of people share it on Facebook and on WhatsApp, and it goes all over the place. And I just want to say that it's for me. When I speak to you, I'm talking about me as well. There are times we've just got to trust in God. The storm is going to stop if you're holding on to Christ. They looked and they saw him sleeping. Don't you care? See, here's the choice. We've got to know that Jesus has got us by the hand. We're going to get to the other side. Make no mistake. We're going to get there. We're going to get to the other side. But we can either go there through fear, and that's what's going through the world today, fear, or we can be right snuggled up with Jesus in the bottom of the boat, resting. And that's what the whole thing is about. We must rest in what we have and hold on to what we've got. We've got Jesus Christ, but my faith isn't strong enough. Yes, it is, because Jesus will meet you where your faith stops. Thank you. And next time, I'll be speaking on a Bible study. We'll be continuing the prayer of Jesus in John chapter 17, where he prays for his disciples. Until then, God bless and keep well.